Welcome. I am Avtar Simrit, and this is Connecting with the Muse. I am here with Monique Rebelle, author of Transcendence Calling and visual artist. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Avtar. It's a pleasure. I'm very excited about our discussion. Very cool.
Now, can you explain a little bit about what your book is about and why you wrote it?
Sure. This book came after many years of contemplation, actually. That contemplation that's not exactly started at the time after my experience, because I've always had the tendency to kind of sit and stare at the painting. Mm-hmm. But it was after I had my experience of a full Kundalini Rising that I knew that one day I am going to write about it in order to share the experience with others, because although I went through it it was very easy for me to go through the experience itself. Before the experience, it was very difficult because I was very depressed and suicidal. And I know that these days we already know much better what Kundalini Rising symptoms can be. And it's good to share the information, because the path can be very difficult, and it usually is, because this is when the problem starts, especially when emotional problems start. This is when Kundalini often wants to awaken, right, and wants to help us. And so that's why eventually, after so many years, I was able to get the words together, hopefully be as clear as I could about the whole process and my insights about it. So that's how the book came about.
Definitely, and you do it very well, especially for people who might not be as familiar with the subject matter, and maybe people who haven't had the experience yet might know what to expect if those things occur spontaneously within them.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, it really was a big deal for me to try to put it in words properly and clearly, because, of course, I'm not the only one who has Kundalini Rising, who had Kundalini Rising symptoms, who had the experience. But very often, the experience happens so fast that people suddenly are simply finding themselves to be almost like a new person,
right,
in a new environment, in an environment that they knew before, but it's a completely different story.
Right.
And very often it's very hard to explain what actually happened. And my experience was very, very clear to me. And I was able to observe my consciousness moving. And because I didn't know anything, it was years ago, and there was no information like today that you can just look on internet.
Right.
What is Kundalini? I didn't even know the word. And someone told me about chakras probably about maybe a year before I had my spontaneous experience, and I said, well, I don't really believe in that stuff. I never had a spiritual teacher. I just lived with my art. That was my thing. I related to my art. I was living by myself. I had friends who were also artists, And I didn't know anything about Kundalini Rising. I didn't know about chakras. I never heard the term subtle body.
Right.
And I also didn't think that spiritual enlightenment was something specific.
Right.
You know, I just like most of us, we just have a kind of a vague imagination about what it could be, and we never think, well, this is I always thought, well, maybe someone out there in a cave, you know, meditating for how long and reading some books and practicing something, maybe they, but not me. Right?
Yeah, because before the experience, for a lot of people, it only exists as a philosophy, something that they think about.
Yeah.
You know, and you can tell, though, the people who have actually had the experience and ones who have just kind of read about it, you know?
Yeah, most people read about it, heard about it from other sources, and it's incomparable. The imagination that we have about the experience and the experience itself, and then what happens after. Yes, we can have a lot of ideas about it, but nothing replaces the actual process, the actual experience. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And in many ways, the experience is kind of indescribable. But mystics have always tried to describe it in one way or another.
Yes, we've always tried to describe it, and fortunately, over millennia, we were able to distinguish the subtle body, right?
Yeah.
With the third eye.
Exactly.
So at least that was something that's known, so people could relate to it. And just like in ancient India, people were really relating to chakras and subtle body, probably, I don't know if more than now they do in India.
Right.
But here in the Western world, we're just kind of learning about chakras and learning about the subtle body and the Kundalini, and there are all kinds of interpretations of that. But all these interpretations are from the third eye.
Exactly.
From the sixth chakra. Which is different to what I experience without knowing anything about subtle body. My experience was not happening with me observing it from the sixth chakra.
Okay.
And this is one of the big differences that between how I present it and how you may read about it somewhere else, because it says, yes, the Kundalini awakens and moves through the chakras, right? And when it reaches the top, when it's able to reach the top, it exits. It kind of opens up the top of your crown chakra, and it exits through. And I know it goes and it circulates.
Yes.
And it cleanses everything. It cleans your whole body, the whole subtle body system. It blows the chakras open completely. So you can imagine that. You can look at it from the perspective of looking at what we already know as the subtle body and the whole picture.
Right.
But in actual experience, it's different.
Yeah.
And this is something no one has ever written about.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, as I said, the experience is so fast.
Right.
Or even people who become spiritual teachers, they don't necessarily have the whole experience.
Right.
Okay. It's such a big deal to move through from the third chakra to the fourth.
Yeah.
It's such a tremendous change in view of the world and life, and everything, that if that experience can happen to someone and suddenly he or she, suddenly they feel the power of the fourth chakra, that's often enough to connect with others and teach love.
Exactly.
And so Jesus Christ was teaching love, and I have my understanding, it's all just my individual viewpoint,
right,
is that in his in experience of Jesus Christ, his consciousness definitely went up to the sixth chakra, and was stationed later in the heart. But it's not clear if it actually exited through, because at the point where your consciousness moves out of your body and leaves the sixth chakra, what I call the sixth dimension, we don't have any more gods and goddesses and concepts. There are no concepts. There are no things to look for. There is just consciousness.
Exactly. I mean, Buddha called it the emptiness.
Exactly.
It's nothing.
He called it the emptiness, and I am kind of, in my understanding, I have a little bit of different terminology. I'm using different terminology. I don't know if you've noticed in my book, or maybe I didn't yet. In this book, I don't write precisely all the steps of the exercise that I call emotions emptiness. But that's the work on the second chakra.
Okay.
And that's when I say the exercise, the practice of emotions and emptiness is something that I noticed during the experience.
Okay.
And I practiced that for many years subconsciously. So you see, my experience, the way I describe it, is from the way I went through it, but it's also, I explain the subconscious practices that I did for years. You can say that, wow, it just happened. But
there's a lead up to it, always.
Exactly. There is a lead up to it. And many of us, so many people are actually maybe really close to have the full experience, but because they don't even know that the practices they do are going to lead to it, they're just intuitively feel that this is what they have to do. And this is how my life was. Before the experience, it was always some kind of intuition was taking me places, getting me in trouble, making me, and I was like, well, I guess I'm stupid, but I kept on going because my intuition kept on telling me.
Exactly.
That's how it is with art, That's, I kept on doing it, and I kept on, I would say to myself, many years before my experience, I would say, well, no matter what happens with me, no matter how I feel, I'm going to paint.
Exactly.
And this is this very, very important part of the wisdom that I'm trying to share with others, is that there are specific practices that all of us should do consciously in order to know that it's not, besides the fact that it's going to better our lives. Because of those practices giving us so much support. It also eventually may bring a full spiritual enlightenment. So
Exactly.
it's very important. So that practice that I was mentioning is the practice that I call emotions emptiness.
Right, for the second chakra.
For the second chakra, because I was able to observe finally, and that was the day of my experience.
Right.
I was able to observe that within several steps that I did in order to help myself with the terrible emotion that was overwhelming me, that made me want to kill myself.
Right.
It was such a strong urge that I did whatever I could in order to try to stop myself from it.
Right.
And this is when I used the same practice that I used during the time when I was painting. When I was really depressed, I still wanted to paint, and I was able to kind of step out of the depression, if you know what I mean, and go into the painting.
Exactly.
During the time when I was going through my experience, which I still didn't know that it was already, I didn't know it was already happening. I had no idea. So during that time, I was able to identify the emotion, separate it from, first of all, separate it from the story, from the whole thing that your mind is telling you.
Exactly.
The mind is telling us whatever it wants, unfortunately, unless we train it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But you can choose also not to pay attention to it, you know?
Right.
And like what your practice is, separating yourself
You can
from...
separate, so you can choose not to pay attention, but it will come back with vengeance. It will. But at that moment, right before the whole experience became really magical to me, when I started to see that something very different was happening to what I knew about life altogether. Before that, I was able to step out of that emotion. And so, because I did not... it was overwhelming me so much. It was so powerful. And for months before that, I could not think of anything good. So we have all kinds of psychotherapy and stuff that it tells us, just, think about something good. Think about something great and you'll be fine.
Like positive affirmations.
Right. Yeah, it is. It is kind of a pacifier in a way. Right?
It's like Band-Aid spirituality.
Exactly. So, we're just, perfect. That's it. Because what we need to do, we need to step out of the negative emotion and find that space of emptiness.
The neutrality.
The neutral space.
Exactly.
It's very specific. It's not like anything else at all, because normally, even without realizing it, we always carry some kind of emotion around us.
Yes.
It's always there. And you probably too can tell if people are carrying with them what kind of emotion, you feel, right?
The energy.
Right. Me too, and I always felt that. But when it comes to ourselves, it's much harder to, you really have to focus and figure out what that emotion is, and then the process of just stepping out without denying it, without punching it in the face, because it's gonna come back. Right? So finding that emptiness is a major step towards the Kundalini going up.
Exactly.
Because by creating the neutrality in the second chakra, the Kundalini, that's naturally wants to go up anyway, has a place to go.
Yeah.
It moves up. It starts moving up naturally. So this is the first magical part of the emotions. You can say they are a trigger because they, we can deal with emotions, as you probably know. We don't have to have a sense of suicidal thoughts and feelings in order to do that practice of finding the neutral space. Actually, any kind of emotion will do, even positive. If you feel positive emotion and do that practice to bring yourself from the state to the neutral state, the specificity of it is the same. It kind of feels like a desolate landscape.
Totally.
Where there is no good or no bad.
Exactly. The way Yogi Bhajan describes it is, he says the teacher is one who's not affected by the pair of opposites. So either the positive mind or the negative mind.
Right.
And that's exactly what it feels like,
Right.
But, it's hard to describe to people, it's like when you're using the word emptiness or nothing, because it's you can say there's an absence, of misery.
Right. I think the reason why it has been so difficult for thousands of years to understand, it's because the term emptiness is confused with mind, with enlightenment, with all kinds of things that are around the subject. But actually, if we look, and I just was just like incredible luck that I was able to see all the steps. That the first observable step for me was to find that space of emptiness, and that was at the beginning, before my Kundalini actually it jumped out of me and swirled around me, and it was terrifying, and it was pure magic already then. But before that, I found that space of emptiness. And in the past, when I was painting, I did not see that space of emptiness because as I would step out of the emotion, I would step into the painting right away. So at the time when I was in that bathtub trying to figure out how not to kill myself, I had no access to painting. It was not something I could even do at that time. It was impossible. All my energy, all of my power was to stop myself from committing suicide.
Exactly. So all of that kind of suffering came to a peak, would you say?
Yes, it was coming to a peak for a while, and for a while I was discussing with myself how to end my life, and then being terrified by the idea and just completely shocked by it. I tried to stop myself from it, and the only way I was able to stop myself from it was to separate the emotion from the story, which is separating the second chakra from the third. Which is something that people don't do. Because we have the story, we have the drama. He said this, she said that. Politics, environment. There is always a story that we react to.
Because they think that's who they are.
This is the ego, the dominance of the first three chakras. We have the chakras here. Awesome. Here. Perfect. I'm so glad because, I always teach with that little painting. I carry it with me everywhere. I put it up and go here.
It comes in handy.
Yeah, it's excellent. So, the first one is all the material world.
Mm-hmm.
In this material world, we can be a body,
Right.
we can be a piece of cloth,
Mm-hmm.
we can be a shoe,
Right.
we can be dust,
Mm-hmm.
we can be light,
Mm-hmm.
we can be anything.
Yeah.
We happen to have the body that
Mm-hmm.
also is able to have emotions
Right.
about the material
Mm-hmm.
world that we perceive.
Right.
We perceive it, but we also know from science
Mm-hmm.
that there are tiny little bacteria and
Mm-hmm.
there are atoms and electrons, and all that is a material world.
Yeah.
Together with galaxies,
Mm-hmm.
together with all the extent of cosmos,
Mm-hmm.
that's the material world.
Yep.
And so we know from, customarily we know that, but that the physical dimension, that's actually, we don't see it right.
Mm-hmm.
We see it as length, depth, and width, right?
Right. Yeah.
These are the three dimensions.
Uh-huh.
But actually,
Mm.
these are sub-dimensions
Right.
of the material dimension.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's how we measure the material dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that's the first chakra that
Mhm.
opens us up to it.
Mhm.
It has eyes, it's the body, it's
Right.
the physical thing.
Mhm.
We, with our body,
Mhm.
we can see with our eyes, we can hear, we can touch,
Mhm.
we can smell.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this whole apparatus.
Mm-hmm.
That's the physical apparatus.
Right.
If we didn't have the second chakra,
Mhm.
we wouldn't have emotions about it. We would
Right.
just have the physical
Mm-hmm.
experience of maybe bodily, functions, and who knows, we probably wouldn't, maybe we would feel pain, but we
Mhm.
wouldn't have the emotional
Right.
reaction to run away from
Mhm.
it.
Exactly.
Right?
Uh-huh.
So, and we know from this another difference between what my insights and what's already known. It's
Mhm.
about the second chakra, which is also very confusing
Mm.
because how we know the second chakra is it being sexual,
Right.
emotional,
Mhm.
and creative.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So being an artist, you're very in the second chakra. I know I am.
Well, this way
Mhm.
I understand it is
Mhm.
very different.
Okay.
You see,
Mm-hmm.
from what my experience told me,
Mhm.
and later on from all the contemplation that I
Mhm.
did,
Mm-hmm.
the second chakra is just emotions.
Okay.
It is the
Mhm.
spirit itself.
Mm.
It is the Kundalini that we don't have here, but
Mm-hmm.
it resides right here in between the first and second chakra.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The moment Kundalini,
Mm-hmm.
the moment Kundalini is already the name of that energy in the body, let's
Yes.
say,
Mhm.
or in our being, right?
Yes.
This is
Mhm.
our consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Consciousness as it is,
Mm-hmm.
that individual consciousness
Mhm.
does not have to have a form.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The moment the subtle body is being created,
Mhm.
that means that the material body is being created, emotional
Right.
dimension. I call them dimensions.
Right.
The material dimension is created, emotional dimensions are created, mental,
Mhm.
heart,
Yeah.
connection and sound, vision and intuition, and what I call pure intellect.
Mm-hmm.
The moment that's created, the spirit itself
Mm-hmm.
becomes survival,
Mm-hmm.
sexual,
Right.
and creative.
Mm-hmm.
Once there is a body,
Mm-hmm.
once there is a being,
Right.
consciousness
Mhm.
that creates the being,
Mm-hmm.
becomes of those three attributes.
Right. Just the first three?
Just the survival,
Mm-hmm.
sexual,
Mm-hmm.
and creative.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay? So that's the quality of our spirit in the body.
Right.
When spirit is outside of the body, when the body is not there, it doesn't have those qualities.
That's true, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But once it creates it, it wants it to survive, right?
Yeah,
Naturally.
yeah. Mhm.
This is the natural, positive quality
Yeah.
of our life.
Mm-hmm.
We want to survive.
Yeah.
We want more than survive. We want to be here through generations.
Yes.
We want to keep on evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And evolution happens in part by sex.
Yes.
So we're naturally sexual. It has really nothing to do with chakras.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's a new viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same
It's true.
way,
It's true, though.
Good.
Uh-huh.
in the same way,
But the energy, the Kundalini and just life force energy, is sexual energy.
exactly,
You know?
exactly. There you go. So it is, and we feel it as sexual because it's such an important part of our
Yeah.
lives. Survival, yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
You know, somebody's running
Uh-huh.
at you with an axe.
Yeah.
Even if you're in a bad mood, you're going to focus and try not to get killed, right?
Exactly.
It's natural.
Yeah.
That's the spiritual rule of consciousness in the body,
Right.
of Kundalini. Kundalini is an individual unit of consciousness.
Yes.
Your Kundalini is all that you know,
Yeah.
all that you think, all that you've ever seen before, all that you remember, all that you feel. It's everything that you are.
Right.
That's that Kundalini that lives here, normally at the bottom of the spine.
Yeah.
Right? And so the third aspect is creative. Just being survival and sexual, that's fine, but we are creative. We keep on creating. So it's a natural, like I called it in my book, I said it's an intrinsic quality, let's say, of all souls.
Right.
Throughout, across the dimensions, we are survival, sexual, and creative. And that leaves the second chakra to be the opening us up to the emotional world.
Right.
So the first world is the material world, the first dimension. The second world is the emotional world. So in emotional world we can be all by ourselves, or we can emotionally
Connect. Exactly.
See? So it's because the other point that I'm bringing up that's very new, that no one has ever talked about, is the fact that these dimensions, and we have basic 7 ones in the body in order to awaken Kundalini and have it go all the way through and exit through through the top of the head. We just need those 7 dimensions.
Exactly. And in my experience, because my experience is very similar to yours, and so because I experienced the same thing going as the Kundalini rose through the chakras, as like completely different dimensions. So you're like in a different world.
Exactly.
In each one, depending on which chakra you're dominated from.
Perfect. Yeah.
And it's really kind of, it's like Wonderland. That's the only way I could describe it. Like if you're moving in the upper chakras, if you're in the heart or the throat and the third eye, your whole world takes on sort of like a dream-like quality.
You're right,
Uh-huh.
absolutely, because these dimensions, the upper dimensions, they don't operate on the same principles.
Exactly.
But the truth is that they're always there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
The dimensions are always there. And that's another kind of big deal that we need to actually realize and learn and live with the fact
Right.
that we are multidimensional beings.
Exactly.
Kundalini itself is just your consciousness, but it's slumbering. It's asleep here in between the first and second chakra. It gets also some energy from what the third chakra brings. There indeed are energy vortexes, but they bring the information that's coded in the language
Yes.
of each dimension, and each language is different. We have time only in the third dimension.
Exactly.
Although, of course, it seems like we know we get born and we grow older and we look different, and we know through our lifetime that things have changed. Oh my, how they have changed, right? But that's an illusion.
Exactly. And what I've noticed is that when you're higher above the third dimension, time starts being less linear.
Oh, it's time is time exists only in the it's a sub dimension of the third dimension.
Exactly.
See?
So I just use the word time to describe it, even though really there's none at all. So like what's in the future can be the present, and you know, if you're hooking into the Akashic records, everything is
there is no time.
Exactly.
So the time exists only here, only in the. So it's only because we have that sub-dimension to deal with, we can tell our story.
Yeah.
We can say what happened. Well, millions of years ago, we weren't here,
Right.
but there was something going on. There were bubbles coming out of the ground and stuff. Right?
They were amoebas. And, you know.
So we know that all that knowledge is contained in the third chakra,
Right.
and all those stories are there, but actually everything that has ever happened, everything that has ever happened is recorded in the Akashic records.
Exactly.
Future, present, past, it's all there.
Yeah.
But none of these dimensions actually has the sub-dimension of time. It's only so in a way
That's
the time
true.
in our it's only in our mind.
Yeah.
The mind, this kind of mind.
Yeah.
The linear thinking mind, logical mind, that we understand our life
Right.
and we try to communicate. And that's this huge deal. Again, another thing. Why there is so much misunderstanding, right?
Yeah.
Because the third chakra is only thinking in a linear fashion.
Exactly.
It's a very small part of our being.
Yeah. And a lot of people haven't gone beyond the third one.
It's very hard. And this is what, and the reason it's so hard is because it's still very confusing what to do. People meditate for years and then they go, well, can focus my mind and I have so much experience with meditation. And where am I? Right?
Yeah.
Because it is, so far, it hasn't been clear. The dimensions of perceptions have not been clear. We know about chakras.
Right.
But as I'm saying, these dimensions are always there.
Yes.
And there are specific practices on each dimension.
Right. Exactly.
And each of them is working on totally different principle. Like say, dimension of love.
Yes.
Is there time to it?
No.
No. Is there any physical limitation to it?
Mm-mm.
No.
No.
none of that matters.
But yeah, a lot of people, it seems like, are confusing. They're still in the third chakra when they talk about love. They don't really understand what it really is, because to them it's conditional and it's dependent on these things or how long this person's going to stay with them and blah blah blah, you know, and really love is beyond all that.
Of course, of course. Love is a dimension.
Exactly.
And from the viewpoint of the ego, of the first three dominants, of the first three chakras, love is a conditional situation between two people, maybe in a family, maybe something that has to do with the body.
Right.
But love, the same love that we feel for someone that we love very much, that same love is everywhere.
Exactly.
All the time. It's always there.
Yeah.
So the thing is to practice, to dwell in that love all the time.
Exactly.
Because during the Kundalini experience, when your consciousness is moving up, when your Kundalini is moving up, opening up all these chakras, and finally finding yourself, for example, here.
Right.
This is exactly what Jesus and what Buddha and what
Yeah.
all great spiritual masters were teaching.
Yep.
Love. You finally see from that viewpoint that billions of people are living life unhappy and unloved.
Yeah.
Because they don't know that they actually are loved. They're
Exactly.
looking for love in another person. And where is that person?
Right.
And then the person comes and it turns out to be
Right.
so
Exactly. Because they're looking for it outside of themselves. Something else has to give it to them, even, you know, even though that's the essence of what they are.
Exactly. Yeah. So practices on the fourth chakra to open the fourth chakra is to actually give love.
Yeah. And that's why they call it the Christ chakra. You know, Christ consciousness, that's what that means, is the consciousness from the heart, you know, and that's where I operate from, you know. So it's like when I use the word love, and it's the love that I feel for all existence is the same, you know. I don't differentiate.
Exactly.
You know, it's like I don't love this person just because they're my mother more than this person who's, you know, like a street cleaner, you know.
Practicing the fourth chakra, keeping it open. For some, it's easy. For others, it's very difficult. And one thing that I keep on meeting with when I get questions is that, you know, I love, but then you get hurt. If you open your heart, you get hurt. Well, and it is very important thing to understand that we need to practice to get that Kundalini go all the way through, exit, and move freely, eventually through practices. Again, practice.
Exactly.
It will settle in the heart.
Exactly.
And that's when there is no more pain because of it. So in Christianity, because there was no knowledge about dimensions of perception, there is just God and love identified as the same thing. And then people are trying to get there through all kinds of religious rituals. But the rituals are, again, they are of a different, they're all different dimensions, they're different. There is a performance to them, which is the fifth chakra. There is love, which is the fourth, the love that has to do with all kinds of good, beautiful words like trust, like help, like justice, like
And
support.
there's also the intellect involved, because you have to understand the metaphor of the ritual, what it actually symbolizes.
Absolutely. So rituals are actually the upper chakras all working together.
Right.
But for us, without knowing about the nature of each dimension separately, we don't understand how to, we find ourselves, okay, I'm supposed to love everybody, and then they're gonna come and kill me.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Those people are bad. Why should I love them? So it's a very different viewpoint. Once your consciousness moves up there and goes further, the ego looks very different.
Yes, totally. And so, like you were saying, if people are still getting hurt, when they're operating from love, then they still haven't found that neutral space.
Well, it is because once the consciousness goes up to here, even if Kundalini opens, the road, if it goes up here, it will still go back down.
Right.
And this is when we find that, okay, well, I was feeling phenomenal a week ago, and now I'm all down again. I don't,
true.
So that up and down has to do with consciousness that two things could have happened. One is, which is more common, is the fourth chakra opens.
Yes.
Because of practice, because of certain circumstances, because of just us wanting to be there and dwell in the love, it opens up.
Right.
But it could be just upper chakra opening.
Yes.
And then it will close again.
Right.
And we have no control over it. Okay?
Yeah.
Or it could be Kundalini rising up to that point.
Yeah.
Then it's longer lasting, but it's not permanent either. It will eventually go back down.
Yeah.
Eventually we'll find, the whole world is against me, or the neighbors are terrible, right?
Yeah.
And you just start again to collect the emotions that will linger in the second chakra. Your view of the world will again, the politics, man, they're just really driving me crazy.
Right.
Okay. and so on. I mean, this is the most typical thing, that if the upper chakras open suddenly, then they can also close suddenly.
Right. Because I've noticed that with people too, and in myself in the past. But if you've had, an experience like you had with the full Kundalini Rising, when an experience like that is like permanent and is like altered you completely.
That's the thing, to be through that whole experience. It really takes time to contemplate it afterwards too. It took me 20 years before I wrote my book. Okay. So there are those different ways we experience kind of supernatural stuff, let's call it. First would be the upper chakras suddenly open. And they can open because of circumstances, and we can have predispositions to have them open.
Right.
For example, if you are a musician, your fifth chakra is constantly being trained, constantly being cultivated, constantly being open.
Exactly.
And together with being able to hear the sounds so much better than if you never played any instruments or sang or anything, it also gives you a feeling about the vibe in the area.
Totally.
It also gives you certain psychic abilities. So some people will have more predispositions to more psychic abilities, some less.
Yeah.
But that's all what the fifth chakra opens us up to. It opens us up to the world of other beings,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
connection with them,
Mm-hmm.
help from them,
Mhm.
or if the chakra just opens by itself and there is no Kundalini rising involved,
Yeah.
then those beings can be bad too.
Right. Mhm.
Okay, so it could be some bad ghosts.
Right. Uh-huh.
Bad
Some
spirits.
shadows.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Yes, it could be some bad stuff.
Mhm.
But either way, if the fifth chakra is open,
Mhm.
developed, we'll be getting all that information. We're never alone when our fifth chakra is open.
Exactly.
Even when we play music just by ourselves, the fact that there is that vibration,
Yeah.
that vibration connects you with,
Mhm.
because it's a connection. The
Yes.
fifth chakra connects.
Exactly.
Right.
Hmm. And that's like, I never stop creating, I'm
Yeah.
always creating music or writing something, and it's always been a spiritual practice for me.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm constructing it, it's more like I'm receiving it.
There you go. Exactly. And you can find that the deeper you go into that practice, whatever artistic practice it is, you'll eventually see that the energy is just going through you. You're
Exactly.
more like a medium. And this is, for me, has been the case for so many years that I remember living in Amsterdam and having a studio, and we with some other artists. And I was in my early 20s, and I remember painting and painting and painting. We had this motto to do a painting a day.
Yeah.
We're all just going for it.
Uh-huh.
And then, the end of the day, I just relax and I look at all this stuff. I'm like, did I make it?
I know. I have the same thing too. I'm like, I made all these albums. I wrote all these, stories and, stuff. Uh-huh. It's crazy. I'm like, where did it come from? Like, especially if you discipline yourself to do it every day, like you were saying, even if you don't feel like doing it, or
it's very important. Yeah.
And so that's what I've been disciplining myself, especially writing my book, writing a novel that's like really long,
Cool.
and it's like every day I discipline myself to write at least 2,000 to like 2,500 words.
Fantastic.
And it's like just like my manuscript is like 350 pages now. I'm like, where did all this come from?
Excellent. So this is the way to progress for every person, everyone, is to train the lower chakras and to cultivate the upper ones.
Exactly.
Because the upper ones are kind of we don't really know that much about them. They're closed up, and all on the average, the humanity only pays attention to the material world, to their emotions. If they feel good, that's perfect. If they feel bad, oh my God, and to that mind, and that mind can tell you anything if you don't train it.
Yeah, exactly.
The mind, people. What really needs to be understood very well, and that has to be taught in schools, not some kind of weird religion, but the true fact that the subtle body is actually a real thing.
Yes.
Only it's subtle, so it's you can see it only with the sixth chakra open, with the third eye. But the truth is that we are magical beings asleep here in between the first and second chakras. But we have all these chakras and dimensions to our disposition to create life the way we want to.
Exactly.
Each person is. And most of us we all have developed the first, second, and third chakra. They're developed. We don't need to develop them more and more and more. They're already developed. I mean, except for younger kids when they're still doing the process of learning, accumulating knowledge up until maybe when you're 30, your Saturn return comes, and that's when you kind of settle with what you already know.
Right.
But generally, all we know is the facts, all that information, especially now that we're getting with the information overload. Like, what are we going to do with all that?
Yeah.
We're not doing anything, just packing it into that mind, that logical mind, and getting very confused. But in truth, that spirit is just that all these dimensions. It's actually, in comparison to the power of our spirit, of that consciousness, these dimensions are to our disposition, and they are magical. Religions, psychic sciences, like astrology, like numerology, like I Ching or tarot cards, gods, goddesses, religions, that's all the sixth dimension.
Totally. Yeah.
So if someone has the experience and it goes up to the sixth, which is very possible, that the seventh doesn't open.
Okay.
So if it goes up to the sixth and then eventually it dwindles down wherever it settles, usually it goes back here, then that person can start a new religion. Believe in gods and goddesses and whatnot. On top of it, if the soul self-realizes, that's the sixth chakra has all these different levels. So once your consciousness is in the sixth chakra, it will be moving on if you use the self-inquiry process, which now I know it sounds like something new I'm throwing in, but I need to mention that there are conditions for each practice. And practice of self-inquiry starts in the third chakra and goes all the way to the seventh. And with that present, the consciousness up at the top of the sixth chakra self-realizes as an eternal soul. And as an eternal soul, completely independent of any earthly stuff altogether, released from any of those requirements that we live through as physical beings, that soul can become a deity. We can become gods if we so want to. It's not, it's these are archetypes that have been there, and we can create new archetypes as well. So all that incredible freedom there in the at the top of the sixth chakra is so much more beyond what we live with constantly. I'm feeling good, I'm feeling bad, I'm hungry, I'm not hungry, I'm sleepy, I want this, I want that, I need more money, and then what did they say, why is this way, and I need to learn more engineering. And so on. I mean, this is like this crazy world we live in, driving on the freeway to work and back, and it just
the monotony.
It's just there, and it's buzzing with all that information that we are that's stuck in here. Because we don't separate the emotions from
the story,
the mind from the story. So we get the story keeps on going, and then we're completely taken by it, right? We're taken by the stories. Stories can be so interesting.
But once the Kundalini goes all the way through and out the seventh, and you're in that space, there's like no story left.
No, because the story actually, the stories dissolve at the point when Kundalini goes through the third chakra. This is, and I wrote about this in my book with quite a detail, because I wanted to present it the way it actually happened to me. That within a few minutes, I because of the Kundalini current going through my third chakra,
Yeah.
I could observe
Mm-hmm.
all of my thoughts
Yeah.
that were moving in time. As I was observing those thoughts that I had as a 2-3-year-old, and then 4, 5, 6, all those trains of thoughts, we just have a few.
Right.
It seems like, my God, the mind and the thoughts and thousands and thousands and thousands. Yes, but they all are coming from those few trains of thoughts that we
Right.
have. There'll be family, there'd be dreams, there'd
Right.
be work, there'd be relationships, there'd be ambitions, whatnot. Each of us has just a few of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And actually the mind, the perfect computer,
Yeah.
unencumbered with the emotions,
Yeah.
is able to observe and follow all of these thoughts.
Yeah.
And the moment it brings them to the present time, they vanish.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They get resolved.
Mm-hmm.
And the energy remains.
Mm-hmm.
The energy becomes light, becomes omniscience,
Exactly.
which is not that we have all these knowledge about every detail. No, it's not about that.
Right.
This is not about Akashic records, and this is not about remembering and knowing everything ahead of time. It is about having the mind to your disposition.
Exactly.
Your consciousness has the mind to your disposition, to its disposition,
Yeah.
to do whatever with that mind, to use that mind,
Yeah.
to resolve, to solve any problem.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Everyone has the mind that's able to solve any problem if it comes up.
Most people don't know how to use it. It's using them.
Exactly. This is where we're at in the cycle of life and death, in samsara.
Yeah, exactly.
This is where we're at. In the dominance of the first 3 chakras, the mind is using us
Right.
to do, and the mind has no purpose.
No.
We have to give the mind a purpose.
Exactly.
We have to ask the mind if we want to focus it the way I teach sometimes, focusing the mind. The mind is a dog that you need to train.
Yes.
You call the dog and you say, sit,
Mm-hmm.
and watch how your mind is doing. After, a little, if the dog, the mind is not trained, they're gonna go boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom, all over
Go
the place.
everywhere.
Like a crazy dog, like, not even crazy, like an untrained dog will
And people
run
don't
around.
realize how much energy they expend with the constant chatter in their mind. Once you can, calm that down and connect to the no mind, it's like then you can use the mind as the tool, and you conserve all that energy and conserve it for what you actually want to create.
So exactly. So each of the chakras is able to transcend the energy.
Right.
Along with the Kundalini moving, the energy will transcend. So that congested emotional chakra, once there is neutrality achieved, once you're in the neutral space, the energy will come in and it will cleanse it, and the mind instantly will start coming up with better ideas.
Right.
Because when we are oppressed by emotions,
Yes.
we come up with bad ideas.
Yeah, it's true.
And when that process of finding the emptiness is there, and when we stay in that emptiness,
Right.
then naturally it's going to be the energy, our consciousness is going to be moving up, and it's going to be reaching here. And this thing, the mind, will have everything, the mental concepts that we've had since we were growing up, little babies. We
Yeah.
already will have that. All the structures, all the systems that we are taught to believe in and we believe in, all that who we think we are.
Right.
I am this, I am that,
Right.
you know. Anything is an obstacle to actually clear thinking.
Exactly.
So,
Because then you have this concept of like who you are. So then you have to put restrictions on yourself based on what you think that concept of you would and would not do.
yeah, exactly.
It's crazy.
Exactly. Yeah. So the mind needs to release all those thoughts too.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest thing to do. And you know, honestly, this is just how it simply happened. But I did practice for years.
Right.
And I practiced very early on,
Yeah.
subconsciously. I practiced because of my childhood. The first part of that practice is the practice of know thyself, what I call know thyself.
Exactly.
Knowing about yourself. What does your mind tell you about you?
Right.
Who are you? What is your mind saying? You know, my mind would tell me that I'm worthless, you know,
Yeah.
or something like
The
that.
normal stuff.
Yeah. So the mind can tell us all the stuff that's based on whatever happened in the past in our lives, because it concludes. It's just this logical thinking. Well, I didn't manage to get this. I will not manage to do that.
Yeah.
The logical linear thinking is identifying.
Right.
Okay? And that's the mind that's not gonna go very far, even though some people achieve a lot of power and wealth with that mind, because it's very well trained, and they're able to use it, but they still are not connecting with the upper chakras, and they're convinced that this is who they are. They are these big deals because they have the money and because they succeeded and they're going to succeed again and so on. So it's all these traps that the mind has for us. It's not possible to see through it unless we do meditate, or unless we do practices that will focus that mind to the point when it's able to surrender.
Exactly. And that's the key. And I was actually going to ask you that before with the creating the neutral space. Would you say that that's similar to the experience of surrendering?
That's the next, surrendering is the next step.
Okay.
The second chakra, the second dimension, is the neutral from emotions. It's very simple, but it's actually a fine-tuned space that we have to enter and stay in as long as we can.
Right.
At first, it's very hard to be there for longer than a couple of seconds.
Right.
Just see a glimpse of it. But if we use our mind to guard us from that emotion coming back, or from the mind going on its own, you know, doing its own stuff, then we can extend that time of neutral space and dwell in it. So we are already using the mind then consciously to guard us from the emotion to come back, but then the practice is needed to focus the mind. That's the next step. And surrendering is something that we can't do on our own.
I know. When I experienced it, it wasn't like something I did. It just happened, you know.
We cannot do it on our own, but we have to practice, and it will happen by itself.
Yes.
So what happens first is that the mind is trained enough to be able to focus on one thought.
Right.
Which is already very difficult for a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult. Once it can focus on one thought, eventually it will happen that that thought brought into the present time, the present moment, will vanish. And in the process of surrendering the mind, before that, we will have several thoughts rambling around. Not like thousands, but just a few. Once we have those few thoughts and we know them really well, you'll eventually see that those thoughts, they just repeat themselves. They're just going around in a
a loop.
In a loop, yeah. They're just looping around.
Yeah.
And it constantly seems to us that this is us thinking. That we have to find the reason, we have to find this, and the mind is probing, but it's not getting anywhere. Eventually, this is a limited existence.
Right.
This does not have all the answers. It doesn't.
Yes.
But the mind does not want to give in.
No.
It thinks that it has the answers, but instead is just going around in a circle.
Yeah.
And once it's reaching that state of only few thoughts going around in the circle, that's when surrender has to happen. But it's really not easy.
No.
Because the mind, like my mind, was just never surrendered actually on its own. No. I just finally, I had to agree to commit suicide.
Right.
So it's just a very fine line there.
Exactly. And it's when it happens, it seems, instantaneous, but there is a lot of stuff that leads up to that moment.
There is a lot, you see, like there is a lot of contradictions. Seemingly, there are a lot of contradictions in what to do in order to evolve, in order to have the Kundalini rise, in order to have the practice being successful. And there are schools that say, well, forget about the mind, just don't deal with the mind. But that's not gonna work either. If the mind wants to think, you have to let it think.
Yes.
But make it think more and more on your cue.
Exactly.
And
not just in the loop.
Right. Make it think more according to what you want it to get. Make it go deeper instead of all over the place. That's why some people have jobs that allow them to do the mind training practices, because they're repeating certain, like Zen practices, repeating certain sequence of things that lead to a goal.
Yes.
Others have jobs that will be only distracting.
Right.
So they have to go over that distracting phase and go into the level where mind again, because mind is able to do that.
Yes.
Where mind can have an idea what are the stages.
Right.
What are what's the sequence of moves that actually achieves certain goal?
Right.
So there are many practices, and we do many of them subconsciously, and many of them are into certain schools of thinking and spiritual practices, and those practices are often not just with mind.
Yeah.
They are connected with upper chakras or sometimes lower chakras.
Yes.
For example, if we are talking about physical exercise, right?
Yeah.
Like me, I really have a problem with focusing. I'm like I just like to be everywhere at once.
Yeah.
And the best thing for me to focus is, among other, I mean, painting has always been that. So it's the connection with the sixth chakra,
Right.
because it's the visual thinking. But I ski.
Yeah.
I like to ski. I finally, after years, I was practicing for a long time to ski the steeps
Yeah.
and the bumps, because if I don't focus, I'm gonna kill myself.
For real.
So I have to. So that's my spiritual practice.
It brings you to the present moment. You have to be.
Exactly. You have to be there. And in this society, in our world today, we're kind of babied all the time. We're like, oh, don't do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
This is too dangerous and whatnot. I mean, there are all these rules that make us not go after certain things that will really help us in focusing the mind, in bringing it to your control, and in allowing it to eventually surrender.
Exactly.
Because without surrendering, it's not the energy. The Kundalini is not gonna be able to go up.
Yes.
And that's the biggest deal altogether.
Yeah. So speaking of practices, like my personal daily spiritual practice is Kundalini yoga.
Nice.
And Kundalini yoga, in my experience, is like the fastest way to get the Kundalini moving. Have you done any Kundalini yoga?
I have never done any Kundalini yoga.
No.
I watch some of the exercises, which I know are based on breathing techniques.
Yeah.
And I totally see it. When I was doing my subconscious practice of reaching the neutral state,
Yeah.
it has, after you reach